It's one of those nights, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, in the way that makes your mind feel loud in comparison. You're lying still, or maybe you've changed positions half a dozen times already. You're not in pain, not exactly, just restless, full, tender, tired in the way that doesn't always lead to sleep. And that's okay. You're here now, in a soft space, a safe one. You don't have to do anything or solve anything. Just breathe. Just listen. Tonight we're going to talk about something the world has whispered about for centuries, quietly, conflictedly, often with shame. Let's talk about virginity and what it meant in ancient cultures, not from judgment, not from discomfort, just gentle, curious wondering. Because what we think of today, purity, innocence, worth, wasn't always the story. You open your eyes. You're standing in the flickering light of an oil lamp. The air smells of beeswax and dried herb. The room is small stone walls, woven mats, soft dust beneath your feet. You're in ancient Greece, or Rome, or Mesopotamia. You're not sure time here is soft, but the conversation is the same. A girl is being prepared for marriage, not for love, though she might be lucky, but for alliance, contract, bloodline. Her virginity. It's not about her, it's about them, her family, her father, her price. She's quiet. Her eyes are wide, her hands folded. No one has asked her what she thinks of all this, only whether she's intact. You step outside. Now you're in ancient India, or early dynastic China, or an African kingdom whose stories were passed down by memory, not script. Here, too, virginity is currency, a way to guarantee paternity, a symbol of obedience, a boundary that must not be crossed, at least not by the wrong man at the wrong time. But here's the strange thing. It's not always about sex. Not really. It's about control, about belonging, about making sure someone else, usually a man, knows that a body has never belonged to anyone else before him. And yet, in other places it was different. You drift to ancient Egypt. There, virginity wasn't tracked the same way. Women could have lovers before marriage and sometimes after. There were contracts, yes, but also poems and a kind of openness that other cultures didn't always allow. In some indigenous traditions, virginity wasn't a concept at all. There were rites of passage, yes, but they were about becoming, not withholding. You sit on the edge of a stone well, watching a young woman trace patterns in the dust. She's not ashamed, not afraid. She just wants to choose. That too was rare, because virginity in so many ancient places was rarely a matter of personal choice. It was something watched, guarded, proven, with rituals, with cloths, with blood, and with silence. But not always. Some people resisted. Some cultures never demanded. And some quietly loved, even when no one else approved. If this slow remembering is helping you breathe easier, you're welcome to like or subscribe, only if it adds softness to your night. no pressure. So, where are you right now? Curled under a blanket, eyes half closed, sitting quietly with your thoughts, just glad to be heard, even in silence. Whatever shape you've taken, it's perfect. You don't need to be pure. You don't need to be untouched. You don't need to be anything other than here. Let your breath slow. Let your jaw unclench. Let the weight of old ideas drift away like incense smoke in an open temple. Tonight we'll explore the quiet spaces between myth and meaning, where virginity was shaped by power politics and fear, but also by the deep human longing to belong, to choose to matter. Let's begin. Hey, guys, tonight we're going to slip through the silent corridors of ancient temples, dusty scroll libraries, and candlelit bedchambers to ask a question you've probably never really had answered. What did virginity actually mean in the ancient world? Was it a sacred bond, a biological truth, a social illusion, or more often than not, just not a thing at all? We're told so often that virginity was always important, that it was guarded, tested, obsessed over. But the truth is that idea is relatively modern, and even where it did exist in the past, it didn't always mean what we assume. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community has grown. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking now through the edge of time, not a city, but a long hallway lined with doors. Each opens to a different culture, a different belief, a different expectation of what virginity was, or whether it mattered at all. First door, no lock, no warning. Ancient Egypt. You step inside a garden, behind a modest home in Thebes. It's early evening. A young woman is braiding her hair while humming a soft perfume in the air made of crushed lotus. Her mother walks by carrying a basket of bread. There's no ceremony, no warnings, no talk of saving yourself. Why? Because in ancient Egypt, the concept of virginity as a sacred or legally binding identity was more or less absent. There's no ancient Egyptian word that maps directly to what we now call virginity. No official records of virginity tests. No laws requiring proof before marriage. Girls might marry young, yes, but whether they had engaged in sex beforehand was simply not documented with the weight or drama we might expect. If you dig through the legal documents, the poems, the temple texts, what stands out is what's not there. No public shaming, no bloody sheets, no talk of being ruined. In fact, Egyptian love poetry is strikingly mutual. Women speak in the first person. They desire, they invite, they remember. One poem goes, "My heart flutters at the sound of your voice. My skin, it opens like the lotus." There's sensuality, but no guilt. You move into a bedroom now, a woven mat, a low bed linen, curtains billowing in the warm breeze. A young couple is whispering to each other in the dark. There's awkwardness, maybe laughter, maybe not. But there's no feeling that someone's value has changed after tonight. What mattered far more in Egypt was trust, partnership, whether someone could build a household with you. Virginity didn't determine dowries. It didn't gatekeep marriage. If a woman was pregnant before her wedding, that was discussed but not criminalized. Historians still argue whether early Egyptian elite marriages expected chastity from girls of high status. But even there, the records are murky. And in common life, the silence speaks volumes. The only places where purity becomes more pronounced are in certain temple rites, where priestesses or male attendants had to remain ritually clean. But that was about sacred order, not moral superiority. Even then, the definition of clean shifted, and often a bath and a few prayers made everything pure again. You slip now out of Egypt down the next corridor. But before you close the door, you glance back one last time. There's a woman walking down the street at dawn, a basket of fruit balanced on her head, her eyes soft and steady. No one is whispering about her status. No one is tracking her body as if it were state property. She belongs to herself. That's the beginning and the end. In ancient Egypt, virginity wasn't a myth. It just wasn't the point. You step through the next doorway and immediately feel a shift. The air is cooler. The stones under your feet are polished white marble. You're in Athens now, classical Greece, and virginity here. Oh, it's not just a concept. It's a contract, a commodity, a public expectation written into private lives. You walk past a columned courtyard where women draw water from a well. Their quiet heads, covered eyes downcast. They're not shy. They're strategic. Here, a woman's virginity Parthenia is her family's honor, a symbol of legitimacy, lineage, and power. And the weight of it rests squarely on her body. You enter a home in the city's residential district. A father is negotiating his daughter's marriage. She's about 12 or 13. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her value is tied to her presumed untouched state, unseen by men outside her family, unheard in public, unheard now. Her future husband, probably twice her age, her virginity. It's not about desire. It's about control. The laws of Athens don't explicitly demand virginity, but in practice, it's everywhere. If a woman is found to have had sex before marriage, her father can disown her. If a married woman commits adultery, her husband is legally obligated to divorce her, and the man she was with can be prosecuted. Meanwhile, her husband can sleep with slaves or courtesans without consequence. Double standard. Oh, yes, loudly and unapologetically. Historians still argue whether this was about purity or paternity, because in a world where citizenship, property, and inheritance depended on clear family lines, the only way to guarantee your child was your own, was to control the woman who bore it. You walk now into a small shrine, modest but beautiful, a statue of Artemis stands in the center, goddess of the hunt, guardian of young women, eternal virgin, but not innocent in the way we often imagine. Artemis is fierce, proud, wild. She demands respect, not submission. In a way, her untouched state is power, not passivity. In myths, when men violate the sacred space of Artemis or the women under her protection, they're punished, often gruesomely. Actaeon glimpses her bathing and is turned into a stag torn apart by his own hounds. That's the kind of protective energy she brings to the idea of virginity, less about delicacy, more about boundaries. You now enter the theater district where men gather for performances. On stage, virginity is joked about, feared, desired, and lost in a blur of metaphors. Comedies treat virgins as punchlines. Tragedies often turn them into martyrs. In Euripides' plays, virginal daughters are offered as sacrifices to appease the gods. Literal sacrifices. Iphigenia, Polyxena, they are honored for their purity and then killed for it. You walk behind the stage now, through the alleys where hetairae, the courtesans, live. These women are educated, clever, sometimes politically connected. They're not virgins. That's part of their role. They offer conversation, companionship, and sex. They're excluded from marriage, but they're often freer than wives, less controlled, more expressive. It's a strange paradox. The pure girls are guarded like treasure. The impure women are free to speak, but neither owns her story completely. In this world, male virginity is, well, not really a thing. Boys are expected to lose it early often with a slave or a paid companion. It's not questioned. It's encouraged. A young man who clings to virginity too long is considered strange, soft, unmanly. You hear one man joke that a virgin male is like an unplowed field. What's the point if it's just sitting there? So, virginity in ancient Greece is asymmetric. It's powerful but fragile. A girl's value, a family's pride, a source of myth and a cause of war. Remember Helen. But it's also complicated. You walk into a domestic courtyard where a young bride sits alone on her wedding night. She's scared. She's been told this is the most important moment of her life, that this single act will define her value, her virtue, her worth. She grips her dress tightly, as if trying to hold on to something before it disappears. You want to tell her that nothing essential is being taken, that she's still her. But in this world, that's not how they see it. Not yet. You step forward again, only a few paces, but the world changes sharply. Gone are the Athenian courtyards and cheeky poets. You're in Rome now, grand, crowded, and ruled by law. The streets buzz with carts and sandals. The scent of olives, ash, and iron clings to everything. And this time virginity has gone. Divine. You're standing before the Temple of Vesta, its circular, pale-stoned quiet inside. A sacred fire burns in the center, never allowed to go out. Around it walk 6 women cloaked in white, their heads veiled. The Vestal Virgins. These aren't just any women. They are Rome's sacred keepers of purity, chosen as children, usually around 6 to 10 years old. They serve for 30 years. For the first decade, they learn the rituals. For the next, they perform them. And in the final third, they mentor the next generation. 30 years of service, 30 years of celibacy. You sit beside one now as she sprinkles salt and flour over a sacrificial flame. Her movements are precise, practiced, but her expression is distant, focused elsewhere, as if part of her spirit lives in the fire itself. Why such intense devotion to chastity? For Rome, virginity here isn't about personal virtue. It's about cosmic insurance. If a Vestal broke her vow, it wasn't a private shame. It was a national crisis. Earthquakes, crop failures, military losses, all were blamed on Vestal impurity. And the punishment, burying alive. Literally. In a chamber under the ground, with a loaf of bread, a lamp, and no way out. Historians still argue whether this was about spiritual symbolism or simple politics. After all, who better to scapegoat than women bound by impossible standards? And yet, these women wielded enormous privilege. They were above the law. They could free condemned prisoners with a touch. They had box seats at the Colosseum. Senators stood aside for them in the streets. They were virgins, but they weren't powerless. You follow one now into her private chamber. It's bare but not austere. A few scrolls, a carved comb, a polished bronze mirror. On the wall, a tiny scratched inscription reads, Silentia vincit omnia. Silence conquers all. But not all Roman virginity lived in temples. You pass through the Subura district now, Rome's bustling lower ward. Here, virginity among the common classes is far less sacred. Girls marry young, often by 14. Whether they were virgins, that depended on family fortune and who was asking. For the elite, virginity remained a symbol of honor, tied to dowries and dynasties. But among everyday people, it was fluid, quiet, sometimes simply ignored. You stop in front of a mosaic depicting a wedding night, a couple on a low couch, attendants scattering rose petals. It's intimate, not grand. And there's a whispered truth in the air. Many Roman brides bled, but not all from the proof society expected. Some faked it with pig's blood. Some didn't bother. Some never bled at all. Medical writers like Galen tried to explain virginity anatomically, but they often got it wrong. They believed in the seal theory that the body was literally closed until opened. But others disagreed. One physician wrote, "The veil may remain untouched, yet still the maiden has known pleasure." Scandalous, yes, but honest. And what about Roman men? Virginity wasn't something they were expected to keep. It was something to shed, fast. Roman boys were encouraged to sleep with slaves or prostitutes. The more experienced, the better. But there was a line. Too much indulgence made a man soft. A real Roman balanced pleasure with control. He didn't brag. He didn't obsess, and he certainly didn't fall in love too easily. Still, there were exceptions. You peek into a villa where a young nobleman writes poetry. He mourns the woman who won't see him. He calls her pure, divine, cold, her virginity, a shield he can't pierce. His heart, a battlefield. You realize even in this world of pragmatism, desire still wraps itself in the myth of chastity. You pass a street mural, now half erased, a woman holding a torch, turning away from a man on his knees. Below it, scrawled in red chalk, she owes you nothing. Even in Rome, some people knew. This time the air thickens with incense. You step into a small chamber lit by paper lanterns and the faint glow of moonlight through wooden slats. We're in ancient China now, maybe during the Han Dynasty, maybe Song. Time here folds softly, but one thing cuts sharply through the quiet reputation. A woman's zhenji. Her chastity is her virtue, her family's honor, and sometimes her entire legacy. You peer into a room where a teenage girl carefully folds a silk robe. She's preparing for her wedding. Her expression calm, dutiful, resigned. Outside the door, her parents wait anxiously, not for her feelings, but for the future she represents. Her virginity will not just affect her marriage. It will shape her husband's social standing, her in-laws' opinions, even her ancestral line's place in the Confucian order. Virginity in this world is rooted not in biology, but in filial piety. The female body is a vessel less for desire, more for obedience. Purity isn't just about sex. It's about loyalty, silence, and restraint. After marriage, a virtuous wife is expected to serve her husband with humility. If he dies early, she's praised most not for remarrying or surviving, but for staying faithful to his memory, even if she's 20, even if she lives 50 more years. You walk through a village shrine, and there it is, a wooden tablet carved with the names of chaste widows, women who never remarried. Some even committed suicide when their husbands died to prove undying loyalty. It's hard to say whether this was always voluntary. Sometimes it was, other times not so much. Historians still debate whether widow chastity in ancient China was a moral ideal or a coercive tool used to bind women to systems of male control. But we know this during the Ming Dynasty alone, over 35,000 women were officially recognized for their chastity. It was that institutionalized. You now find yourself in a darker place. A lantern-lit tale circles through the streets, a ghost story. A woman waits every night on a bridge, hair loose, white robe, fluttering, face turned to the river. She drowned herself long ago, they say, after her betrothed died, and her family demanded she marry another. Now she waits for him forever. This is not just a haunting, it's a warning to remain pure even in death. But don't be misled. China was never monolithic. In Taoist practices, virginity wasn't always ideal. Some sects believed spiritual power increased with experience. Courtesans during the Tang dynasty were often artists, poets, and lovers of emperors trained in music and philosophy, not just manners. You step into a scholar's home now. A woman sits reading aloud from a bamboo scroll, her voice elegant and calm. She's not a wife. She's a companion. Her virginity irrelevant. Her value lies in her conversation, her wit, the wine she pours, the poems she weaves. In some circles that was intimacy enough, and yet you glance at a Confucian text on the shelf. It reads, "A woman's virtue is to be still." You walk outside into the misty courtyard. A young girl ties her hair with ribbon. Her eyes flick up, curious, watchful. She's still learning what's expected of her. Still learning when to speak, when to bow, when to smile. Her body is not yet her own. Not really. But she senses the weight of it. And so do you. You step softly now through a curtain of hanging beads, and suddenly the air hums with the scent of spices, henna, and burning rosewood. You've entered the ancient Near East Mesopotamia cradle of civilization, where Sumerian scribes invented writing and Assyrian kings carved their conquests into stone. Here, virginity is more than moral. It's transactional. It's written into law, carved into clay tablets, inked into marriage contracts that stretch back 4,000 years. You find yourself in a bustling market in Ur. Women wear long robes, their hair braided and bound. One teenage girl stands with her mother negotiating the price of grain. She is sharp-eyed, firm, calculating. Her virginity, a line item on a bride price, not shameful, not sacred, just factored in. You peek into a legal tablet. If a man accuses his bride of not being a virgin and cannot prove it, he shall pay silver. But if he can prove it, the consequences vary. Sometimes disgrace, sometimes annulment, sometimes violence. It depended on class context and the favor of the gods. Historians still argue whether these laws reflected widespread cultural values or just elite anxieties about property and heirs. But what's clear is this: women were expected to bring their virginity to marriage, and men were expected to care about it, at least in theory. You pass a ziggurat now, rising like a staircase to the heavens. At the top, a priestess watches the sky. She's a sacred woman of Inanna, goddess of love and war. She may be celibate, or she may not. In some rites, she acts as a vessel of divine union, performing what later translators awkwardly labeled sacred prostitution. But that phrase is a blunt instrument. Was it ritual, ceremony theater, or just a misread of ancient metaphors? One tablet describes a priestess as opening the gate of heaven. Another mentions the divine loins, but there's no shame, no punishment, no obsession with first times. These women were spiritual, powerful, deeply respected. Their sexual status was fluid but their authority carved in stone. Down below in the private homes of everyday Sumerians, things are both more rigid and more relaxed. Marriage contracts often include conditions. The bride must be untouched. The groom must be financially responsible. Both must offer loyalty. But in practice, there's wiggle room. Some girls were betrothed young, but lived with their parents for years. Some had multiple marriages. Some women even ran businesses, and their romantic pasts were rarely an issue, unless politics got involved. You glance into a narrow room lit by oil lamp. A bride sits quietly while her new husband removes her veil. No crowds, no inspection, just two people, nervous in the dark. If blood is expected, it isn't required. If silence is taught, it isn't always followed. One cuneiform text from a father to his daughter reads, "Speak only what is wise. Walk where you are seen. Carry yourself as one whose future is worthy." No mention of virginity, just character. And yet double standards ran deep. For women, sex could damage status. For men, it confirmed masculinity. A powerful man with multiple wives or concubines was praised. A powerful woman with multiple lovers, unheard of unless she was divine. You pass a wall, carving now half faded. It shows a man kneeling before a goddess offering figs and wine. Her hand is raised, palm out. She is not shy. She is not hidden. She blesses him not because she is pure, but because she is whole. You wonder how much of what we believe about purity was shaped by voices like his, and how many voices like hers were lost to time. A breeze flows through the alleys of Babylon carrying a chant from a distant temple. You can't make out the words, but the rhythm pulses like breath. Somewhere nearby, a mother braids her daughter's hair. She whispers an old blessing. May your body be strong, your tongue wise, your name remembered. Not pure, not unbroken, just remembered. You step forward and the ground beneath you shifts, less sand, more stone. You're now in ancient Israel, the hill country of Judah, where prophets walk dusty roads and laws are passed down not by kings but by commandments. Virginity here is tightly bound with morality, but also with covenant. It's not just personal, it's sacred, national, a reflection of the divine order. You find yourself in a small village. Houses are built of mud brick, clustered close together. You pass a girl, no older than 13, grinding grain beside her mother. She glances up at you just once before lowering her gaze. Her father speaks with a neighbor about a marriage agreement. The girl's virginity, assumed, required, a symbol of honor for the father, the groom, the tribe. And if it's in question, you step toward a courtroom where a young bride stands before elders. Her husband has accused her of not being a virgin on their wedding night. She denies it. Her parents produce the cloth, the blood-stained sheet from their wedding, the so-called proof. If they can't, she may be stoned. Yes, stoned, executed. Deuteronomy 22 lays it out clearly. The stakes are life and death. And yet, the passage reads like a tangle of rules and reactions. What counts as proof? What if the husband lied? What if she was attacked? The verses spin a complicated web, trying perhaps in earnest, perhaps in anxiety, to legislate sexuality into a clean system. Historians still debate whether such punishments were ever common or if they served mostly as warnings, moral signposts rather than real-life sentences. Some scholars argue these laws were idealized, exaggerated. Others insist they were enacted harshly and often. What's clear is that virginity was not treated as a personal choice. It was evidence, currency, power. You walk now past the temple in Jerusalem. It gleams in the distance, gold shimmering under the sun. Inside, priests perform sacrifices. Ritual purity is everything. Bloodlines must be clean. Marriages must be proper. A high priest, for example, must marry a virgin from among his people. But the idea of virginity here is not always physical. The nation of Israel is called a virgin in poetry, pure unspoiled, betrayed by idols. Cities are likened to women. Sin is cast as adultery. The prophets cry out not in legal terms, but emotional ones. You played the harlot with many lovers, yet return to me, says the Lord. This metaphor bleeds into cultural expectations. Women become symbols of the people of holiness, of betrayal. Their bodies carry not just personal burdens, but national meaning. And yet, real women in this world lived complex lives. Some were mothers, wives, traders, midwives. Others, like Ruth, defied social boundaries, lying at a man's feet on the threshing floor to secure a future. Was she still a virgin? The text never says, and no one seems to care. You now follow a narrow road out of town into the hills. A young couple sits beneath an olive tree. They speak softly, sharing figs. She laughs. He recites from the Song of Songs, a sensuous lyrical exchange between two lovers. No marriage, no priest, just mutual desire. Her body is not a battlefield. It's a garden. Her virginity not mentioned. Her consent clear. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, she says, for your love is more delightful than wine. You pause, because in a world that often judged women by whether they had been touched, this book sings a different tune. A celebration, a flame, a reminder that even in the strictest systems, pleasure still found a voice. The olive tree sways above you. The couple disappears into the hills, and you're left with a question that lingers longer than law. What if virginity was never the point at all? You're in the desert now, but not the one you just left behind. This place is different, dustier, wilder, with fewer scrolls and more swords. Welcome to early Islamic Arabia. The 7th century hums with the sound of camel bells, tribal chants, and verses carried on the wind, words that would become the Quran. Here, virginity takes on new dimensions. It's still linked to honor, but it's also wrapped in poetry power and paradox. You sit in the shade of a date palm beside a well, listening to two women draw water and whisper. One is newly betrothed, the other already married. They speak in coded tones about first nights, about expectations, about how to make it seem like she's untouched, whether she is or not. You realize quickly the idea of virginity here is layered. In pre-Islamic tribal society, female chastity was deeply tied to family pride. A daughter's purity protected the tribe's reputation. An accusation, true or false, could spark blood feuds. There was no state court, only honor. And honor demanded protection, sometimes even vengeance. But as Islam spreads, the rules shift. The Quran speaks of marriage as a partnership, a contract, yes, but one of mutual respect. Virginity is valued especially for brides, but it is no longer solely about proof. It's also about intent, about privacy, about morality, not spectacle. You walk past a small home where a wedding is underway. There's no bridal inspection here, no blood-stained sheets held up for witnesses. Just two people signing a contract in front of witnesses, reciting the Nikah prayers, then retiring to a private room. What happens there? That's not for public debate. And yet the cultural weight persists. In many hadiths, sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, virginity is praised. A man is advised to marry a woman who will laugh with him, play with him, and delight in his presence. One narration mentions virgins being more affectionate. Another says the prophet married both virgins and widows, respecting both. Historians still debate whether early Islamic law institutionalized virginity standards more or less than surrounding cultures. Some say it softened pre-existing tribal norms. Others argue it reinforced gendered expectations. Most agree Islam elevated consent, gave women rights to refuse to inherit to speak, but cultural practices often lagged behind theology. You pass a scholar now hunched over parchment. He debates whether virgin refers to physical state or character. Does piety outweigh biology? He asks himself. You smile. Even in ancient law, questions outnumber answers. You enter a tent now, wide and cool. A poet recites verses before a small crowd. His words drip with metaphor. Her veil was not fabric, but patience. Her walls not stone, but honor. The audience sighs. In Bedouin poetry, virginity isn't anatomical, it's emotional. A sign of restraint, of self-possession, of the sacred feminine. And yet, double standards endure. A man's first time, rarely discussed. His past, often ignored. A woman's, an entire lineage could hinge on it. Some traditions even offered surgical restoration, a way to reclaim purity for social acceptance. Others quietly looked away when Blood was missing on the wedding night. A cup of pomegranate juice could suffice. A carefully placed prick on the thigh. A silent agreement. You're learning now more than ever. Virginity here is performative. It's a story people tell about themselves, their families, their faith. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's theater. Often it's both. You sit beside an older woman tending a fire. Her hands are strong. Her eyes are wise. She tells you softly, virginity fades, but character stays. Her words ripple through the dunes like prophecy. And somewhere deep in the sand, another verse is being written. The floor beneath you cools. The sand gives way to marble. You blink and now you're in ancient Greece, a place of reason, rhetoric, and reputation, especially for women. You walk through a colonnade in Athens. Stone columns stretch toward the sky, echoing with philosophers' arguments and the shouts of boys in training. But the homes just behind these public buildings tell a very different story. Here, virginity is a tightly guarded asset. For a respectable Athenian girl, it's not just prized, it's enforced. You step inside the women's quarters of a modest house. The air is warm and dim, heavy with the smell of wool dye and bread. A mother brushes her daughter's hair and tells her softly, "You are a garden gate. Once opened, it never closes." The girl listens quiet, but her eyes dart toward the courtyard where her brothers play freely. Respectable women, citizen women, are expected to remain indoors, untouched and unseen until marriage. Virginity isn't romanticized. It's mandatory. A daughter's purity protects the family's inheritance. Because let's not forget, if there's any doubt about the paternity of future sons, the entire system collapses. That's why weddings are such formal affairs. The bride is often handed from father to husband, like a sealed scroll. She's likely a teenager. He may be twice her age. Her dowry is negotiated, her virtue assumed. If she isn't a virgin, social death. But not all women in Greece live behind doors. You head now to the temple of Athena. Standing tall, poised and armored, the goddess of wisdom is Parthenos, the eternal virgin. Her name lives in the Parthenon itself, a monument to untouched power. But Athena isn't meek. She's sharp, fierce, warlike. Her virginity doesn't define her passivity, it defines her independence. She belongs to no man. Her mind, her spear, her strategy, hers alone. Meanwhile, in other corners of Greek life, things get blurrier. Take Artemis the huntress, another virgin goddess. She runs through the woods with her nymphs rejecting marriage and men. But her virginity isn't about modesty. It's about freedom. A refusal to be claimed. And then there's Aphrodite. You chuckle as you see her statue lounging nude, all curves and coyness. Goddess of love, seduction, and endless entanglement. Virgin, not even close. Yet worshipped, desired, feared. The Greeks were comfortable with contradiction. Historians still argue whether the ideal of virginity in ancient Greece was more cultural than religious. Some say it was a patriarchal tool. Others argue it reflected deeper philosophical beliefs about control, balance, and order. What's certain is the rules weren't equal. For men, sexual experience, even with courtesans, boys or slaves, was expected, praised even. For women, one misstep and she became a hetaira, a courtesan, a companion of men, witty and well-read, but never respectable. You visit the home of one such woman now. She greets you with a raised eyebrow and a half-smile. Her name is Aspasia, and she once captivated Pericles. She's educated, persuasive, powerful, in salons and private dinners. Her virginity long gone. Her mind still sharp enough to bend a room around her. And you realize something while pure wives were locked away. Impure women had voices, had freedom, had lives. You return to the courtyard, where the same girl from before now threads beads into a necklace. She's not thinking about gods or contracts. She's thinking about the boy she saw at the market who smiled at her when he thought no one was looking. Maybe one day he'll ask for her hand. Maybe she'll say yes. Maybe she won't. But right now she's just dreaming of something that isn't marble or mandate but her own. Now the earth beneath you rumbles faintly with the weight of temples, towers, and incense. You're in ancient India, a land woven from myth and empire, sages and silk, dharma and desire. Here, virginity is not just a private condition, it is a cosmic state. And, like everything else in Indian philosophy, it refuses to stay simple. You begin in a small village where a young girl helps her mother braid flowers into garlands. She is perhaps 12. Her future has already been charted. Horoscopes aligned, dowry negotiated, the groom chosen. Her virginity. It isn't a conversation, it's a given, something expected without discussion. But not because it's hers, because it's for someone else. Her husband, his family, and the generations that will spring from her womb. You pass now into a temple courtyard where statues of goddesses rise with unmistakable power. Parvati, Durga, Lakshmi, none of them virginal in the Western sense. And yet, they radiate purity. That's the paradox. In ancient India, virginity doesn't always mean untouched. It can mean unclaimed, unbound, or even fierce. You're beginning to see it, aren't you? That virginity here isn't moral, it's metaphysical. Take Sita, wife of Rama, in the Ramayana. She is the archetypal ideal wife, chaste, devoted, patient. But when she's kidnapped by Ravana, even though she remains untouched, her virtue is questioned. Rama demands she undergo a trial by fire to prove her purity. She does. The fire accepts her. But the doubt lingers. Historians still debate whether this moment reflects ancient social norms or later reinterpretations of virtue and female loyalty. Was Sita punished by patriarchy or enshrined as a divine symbol of inner strength, scholars still can't agree. Then there's Draupadi from the Mahabharata. She marries 5 brothers. Yes, 5. Virginity out the window. But in many retellings, she regains her virginity magically each time she moves between husbands, not because it's physically necessary, but because it preserves the cosmic order. Virginity here isn't anatomical, it's symbolic, fluid, regenerating. You walk now into a school where young boys chant Vedic hymns. Nearby, a scroll is being read aloud, Kama Sutra, but not the version you're thinking of. This one isn't about acrobatics, it's about etiquette, partnership consent. It discusses the training of courtesans, the roles of wives, the stages of sexual maturity. Virginity is mentioned, but not glorified. Instead, pleasure is balanced with duty and timing. And now, deeper into the forest, into the ashram, where renunciants live. You meet a young woman here, shaved head, saffron robes, a calm like still water. She is a brahmacharini, a celibate seeker. Her virginity is not about marriage, but about self-mastery. For her chastity is a spiritual practice, not a social virtue. But not all Indian women were renunciants or wives. You reach the Devadasi districts, women dedicated to temple service, trained in dance music and ritual. Some remain celibate. Others serve as consorts to deities or later patrons. Virginity, not expected, not required, not even discussed. And yet over time, as foreign rulers arrive and Victorian morality sinks in, this fluidity hardens. Colonial law reframes virginity as proof, as property, as purity. What was once a spiritual or symbolic state becomes increasingly biological and policed. You feel it. India's past curling inward under imported ideals. Still in the old songs, in the sculptures that line temple walls, you hear a different story. A girl carved in stone stands proud hips, tilted eyes open. She is not ashamed. She is not waiting. She simply is. And in that moment you understand. In ancient India, virginity was not a yes or no. It was a ritual state, shifting sacred, sometimes defiant, always complex. Now the wind shifts cold and dry, and snow crunches under your sandals. You've arrived in feudal Japan. The air smells of pine and smoke, lacquered wood and iron. Lanterns flicker down narrow streets, and the silence is so deep you can hear your breath. Here, virginity tiptoes, not loudly asserted, not loudly enforced, but whispered often, indirectly. You find yourself in the quiet courtyard of a samurai household. A young woman kneels folding paper cranes with perfect precision. She is noble-born, trained in etiquette, music, calligraphy, and silence. Her name may never appear in a family history scroll, but her virtue is as carefully guarded as the family sword. And that virtue, yes, it includes virginity, but not as a standalone concept. In feudal Japan, a woman's honor was woven tightly into her obedience, humility, and discretion. Virginity was part of the bundle, but rarely isolated. You weren't praised specifically for being a virgin. You were praised for being unblemished, quiet, graceful, untouched by scandal or desire. In fact, many terms for virginity were implied, not stated. One popular phrase, mujo no mi, meant body without impurity. Another, shoujo, originally referred to young girls later codified into virgin more explicitly in modern use. You hear the click of geta sandals approaching. A geisha walks by, face, painted eyes lined kimono, folded left over right. She is elegance personified. And no, she's not a prostitute. That's a Western misunderstanding. A geisha is a performer, a conversationalist, a master of subtlety. Her virginity, irrelevant. What matters is her art. Some were celibate, some weren't. The question was never really asked. Historians still argue whether pre-modern Japanese society placed strong emphasis on female virginity before marriage. Some point to Shinto purification rituals and Confucian influence codes of family duty. Others argue that women, especially among the lower classes, had far more practical freedoms. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between. You now slip into the back room of a tea house. A bridal kimono rests on a stand, bright red, embroidered with cranes and waves. You're told it's for a mi-ai marriage, an arranged union. The bride is expected to be pure. But if she isn't, well, there are ways to preserve the image. Silence, discretion, a nod, not a confrontation. You hear an old proverb recited softly. The snow does not announce itself before falling. In Japan, modesty is protection. Virginity is assumed unless proven otherwise. And proving otherwise, that would be rude. You walk the outer walls of a Shinto shrine. Now, cherry blossoms drift around your feet. The priestess you meet here is serene, calm, and alone. She is unmarried, yes, possibly a virgin. But again, that's not the point. Her purity is ritual, not physical. She embodies balance between realms. Her celibacy is about channeling kami, not about men. And yet there were darker corners too. In times of war and famine, virginity could become a transaction. A girl's first time was sometimes sold to a patron, not out of choice, but survival. Families did what they could, and the girl, she rarely had a say. You walk past a battlefield memorial now. Stone figures kneel beside a great torii gate. Among the names carved are those of women, some widows, some warrior wives, some girls whose stories were never told. You wonder what virginity meant to them. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Back in the city, you spot a kabuki performance. On stage, a character in white makeup plays the anagata, a man portraying a young maiden. His voice is high, his gestures delicate. The audience believes him because they want to. Virginity here is theater, stylized, symbolic. You realize now that in ancient Japan, virginity wasn't a spotlight. It was a shadow, a quiet expectation carried in the folds of a kimono, less spoken, more assumed, honored, but rarely declared. And like so much in Japanese tradition, it drifted just out of reach, suggested in poetry, echoed in movement, but never quite said aloud. The ground softens beneath your feet as a warm wind rises off the flat plains. You're in Mesopotamia now, land between rivers, where everything smells faintly of damp clay and burnt incense. The sun is setting behind the ziggurat at Ur, casting long shadows over the world's earliest cities. And you're just trying to make sense of how virginity fit into this ancient, complicated civilization. It doesn't take long before you realize something strange. No one here talks about virginity the way later cultures do. There's no halo of romantic purity or poetic longing. Here, virginity is a contractual condition, like a good roof or a functioning irrigation system. You wander into a scribe's workshop, past shelves of clay tablets stacked like ancient spreadsheets. These aren't poems or prayers. They're marriage contracts complete with terms and penalties. And if you look closely, you'll see one clause repeated often. The bride must be unblemished. This isn't metaphor. It's literal. If a girl isn't a virgin at marriage, her father may owe restitution, or the groom may walk away entirely. You meet a merchant discussing his daughter's dowry. He mentions her virginity the way he'd mention the quality of her linen or the size of her trousseau. It's part of her value. Not her only value, but one that's quantifiable and verifiable if needed. And then you hear a story, a tale passed down about a bride returned to her parents after the wedding night. No blood on the sheets, no proof of her purity. Whispers spread. The contract was broken, the marriage void. Historians still debate whether such rituals like presenting a bloodied sheet were widespread or exaggerated. But the fear was very real. But Mesopotamia is a land of contradictions, because not far from the bride's chamber, you find yourself in a temple. The sanctuary of Inanna, goddess of love, war fertility, and yes, unashamed sexuality. Her priestesses glide by in embroidered robes, perfumed and serene. Some live celibate lives, others participate in rites that honor the goddess's passion. You overhear talk of the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage between a high priestess and the king, reenacting the mythic union of Inanna and Dumuzi. Some scholars argue this was symbolic acted out through hymns and offerings. Others insist it involved real ritualized sex. The debate continues to this day. But one thing is certain, in this ritual virginity is not required. It may even be a hindrance. The priestess is revered because she embodies divine femininity, active, sensual, and powerful. And this divine model influenced society more than you might expect. You stroll through the market district now, pottery wool dates, and women singing, bartering, drinking. Among them are women known as harem too. They're difficult to categorize. Sometimes they're priestesses, sometimes entertainers, sometimes unattached women who live independently. Many are sexually active, and surprisingly, many are respected. Not universally, of course. Mesopotamian society had its hierarchies, but enough to make you pause. One ancient tablet even records a woman suing a man for breach of promise after he refused to marry her. She wins, and she's not labeled a harlot. She's just a citizen, a woman wronged. You find another tablet, a poem. It's one of the oldest love songs in history. The words are bold, passionate, almost shockingly intimate. The speaker is a woman. She describes her longing, her pleasure. She's no blushing bride. She's a lover with a voice, a rare thing in most ancient texts. But here, it's baked in clay. Still, by the time you reach the later Babylonian period, the winds have changed. Marriage contracts begin to specify expectations more clearly. Women's sexual histories become more scrutinized. Virginity shifts from implicit to explicit. You read one clause. If she has known another man, she shall be returned, and no silver shall be paid. It's clinical, harsh, but not uncommon. Meanwhile, the Code of Hammurabi looms in your mind. Its black stone stele carved with 282 laws. It addresses marriage, divorce, adultery. It protects wives from abandonment, but punishes them severely for infidelity. Men, they get more leniency, naturally. Virginity becomes part of the equation, but again, not moralized. It's logistical, a matter of paternity, property, reputation. And yet there's another whisper through time, the whisper of an Hedwana daughter of Sargon of Akkad. She was a high priestess of the moon god Nana, and the world's first known author to sign her name to her works. Her hymns to Inanna are fierce and personal. She writes of exile loss and the goddess's power. Was she a virgin? Maybe, but no one talks about that. What they remember is her voice, unshaken, unapologetic. You leave the temple grounds and pass a small house where a mother braids her daughter's hair. The girl is maybe 12. She's about to be married. She looks nervous, not because of love or sex or ceremony, but because of expectation. She doesn't know what's coming, and neither do you. You climb to the top of a ziggurat, now the wind stronger, here tugging at your robe. From this height, you see the city's contradictions all at once. Its sacred rites, its clay contracts, its wild myths, its stern laws. Virginity here is not worshipped. It's not condemned. It's regulated. It's both necessary and negotiable. It exists not as purity or sin, but as proof, a box to check, a standard to meet. And in that tension, you begin to understand something about early civilization, that even before romance, before confessionals, before lace veils and purity rings, virginity already mattered, just not in the way you think. You descend from the ziggurat slowly, feet brushing against sun-warmed stone steps, as the twilight of Mesopotamia fades behind you. The next place you land is something altogether different. No ziggurats, no cuneiform, but towering obelisks and walls painted with gods in profile. You're in ancient Egypt again, but this time focused not on what sex was like, but what virginity actually meant in this golden land of eternal life and rebirth. Here's the first surprise. The ancient Egyptians didn't exactly obsess over virginity. You pause beside a Nile barge where a family prepares for a wedding. There's music, lutes, and clapping. The bride's dress is sheer linen, spun thin as a whisper. Her mother adjusts the necklace of faience beads around her collarbone. Not once does anyone mention whether she's pure. In fact, they don't really have a word for virgin in the way we do now. There's no deep cultural panic about it, no tales of death by scandal, no ancient Egyptian version of the chastity belt. But that doesn't mean sex before marriage was encouraged. You follow the couple down the riverbank where neighbors shout blessings. Sex was supposed to wait until marriage, but mainly to preserve lineage, not morality. Virginity was an expectation, not an obsession. And crucially, it was a private matter. There are almost no public rituals proving virginity. No bloodied sheets, no purity rings. If anything, Egyptian culture was oddly silent about it. Instead, their stories focused more on fertility, attraction, and pleasure. You remember the love poems you read earlier, those written in the New Kingdom era around 1300 BCE. They're passionate, longing. One line reads, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of my love. It lets me not act sensibly." Another says, "I kiss her. Her lips are sweet as wine." These are not the voices of abstinence. They are voices full of desire and boldness. The speakers are often women. There's no shame in these poems, just yearning. But of course, there are lines you don't cross. You enter a courtroom, now papyrus, scrolls rolled tight in the judge's hand. A young woman is on trial, not for premarital sex exactly, but for seduction. The scribe reads a charge. She lured a man with her songs and ointments. It's unclear whether they slept together, but her reputation is under scrutiny, not because of virginity, but because she acted boldly. She inverted the script. That's the theme you notice now. Power dynamics. In Egypt, virginity wasn't prized in the abstract, but reputation was everything. A woman could be sexually active even before marriage and still be accepted if no one talked about it. But if she was seen as manipulative or seductive or loud about her freedom, that was different. Modesty, not virginity, was the social currency. So where did this leave priestesses? You slip behind the curtain of a temple complex in Thebes. Offerings are stacked beside lotus blossoms. The temple women chant softly. Some are celibate, some are not. There's no uniform policy. One priestess serves Hathor, goddess of beauty, music, and joy. She may sing during rites that celebrate union, not abstinence. Another serves Neith, goddess of wisdom and weaving, who is considered a virgin mother. bearing the sun god without a male partner. This idea that virginity could also be divine power feels familiar. But even then, it's symbolic, not policed. You walk through a medical school now, full of papyri on anatomy and fertility. Midwives here record births, menstrual cycles, and methods of contraception. Yes, contraception. Egyptian women had access to pessaries made from honey and acacia bark. They weren't always trying to prevent sex. They were trying to prevent pregnancy. Historians still argue whether these tools were widespread or only available to elite women. But the implication is clear. Sex was part of life. Virginity was a stage, not a virtue. And yet you stumble on a strange thing, an inscription on a tomb. It describes the woman buried there as pure of body. What does it mean? Was she a virgin, a loyal wife, a careful priestess? Scholars still debate the phrase. Some say it means sexually untouched. Others say it refers to her moral character or her ritual cleanliness. So you sit in the shade of a palm tree and try to reconcile all this. Virginity existed, but it wasn't glorified. It wasn't wrapped in ideology. Egyptians didn't hold it up like a torch of morality or chain it to a girl's worth. It was simply part of the marriage timeline, like dowries or house building. More importantly, it was a private matter. And you start to wonder, maybe that's what makes Egypt feel so surprisingly modern. You pass a small house now, where a young couple laughs over figs and wine. He brushes her hand. She smiles. Their marriage may be arranged, but their affection is real. No one asks questions about her past. No one checks sheets. Her parents are more concerned about the harvest than her purity. And as the breeze rises off the Nile, you realize something else. While future empires would fixate on virginity, punish, reward, fetishize it, Egypt let it be. Not ignored, but not weaponized. Not denied, but not deified. Just human. By now your feet know the rhythm of the ancient world. The Nile is far behind you, and the sands have shifted beneath your toes once again. You're standing now on a high, sun-drenched plateau, overlooking white stone temples and the cobalt shimmer of the Aegean Sea. Welcome to ancient Greece, where gods played tricks playwrights shout across amphitheaters and virginity. Well, virginity wears a rather complicated mask. Let's be honest, no culture has layered more symbolic baggage onto the word virgin than the Greeks. But not always in the way you'd think. You walk past a statue of Athena, helmeted and stern. The epithet carved beneath her reads Parthenos, virgin. But don't let that fool you. Her virginity isn't about modesty or shame. It's about power, independence, the complete rejection of male control. Athena isn't untouched because she's delicate. She's untouched because she doesn't need anyone. She's a warrior, a strategist, a city builder, and her virginity. It's her autonomy. Historians still debate whether this ideal had any bearing on real women's lives, because while Athena ruled from marble, real Athenian girls had very different expectations. You slip into a shaded courtyard now where a young girl barely into puberty is weaving wool under her mother's watchful eye. She'll be married soon, likely to a much older man. Her virginity is not symbolic. It's literal, and it's non-negotiable. In Athens, a girl's virginity is her father's honor. It's political capital. Her wedding isn't just a union, it's a transaction. Her sexual inexperience is part of the bride price. There are no romantic poems about it, no flowery metaphors. It's cold, it's practical, it's enforced. You find evidence in the dowry contracts language that assumes she is untouched, clauses that allow the marriage to be dissolved if she is not. No one's asking if the groom is a virgin, naturally. And yet, right next door to these strict homes is the world of the hetairai. You walk into a garden filled with laughter music and the scent of wine. Here are women who have studied rhetoric, music, poetry. They debate with philosophers. They host gatherings of elites. They are not virgins. In fact, they are openly, unapologetically sexual. These are the hetairai courtesans, companions, muses. Think Aspasia, partner of Pericles. She wasn't a wife, but she helped shape political thought. Some hetairai owned property, mentored younger women, and even wrote treatises. They lived outside the rules that bound respectable women, which is why the respectable women were locked inside, literally. You find yourself outside a typical Athenian house. The women's quarters are upstairs and inward, no windows to the street. Their lives are hidden, because virginity isn't just about sex. Here, it's about visibility. A girl is supposed to be unseen, unheard, untouched, until she's handed over in marriage. You hear the voices of male philosophers echo through time. Aristotle, Plato, they all weighed in on women, often unfavorably. A woman's virtue, they wrote, was silence, obedience, and chastity. Virginity becomes a kind of moral leash. And yet, because Greece is never simple, there are exceptions. You find a vase painting of Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Like Athena, she is eternally virginal. But Artemis is wilder. She runs through forests with nymphs bow in hand. Her virginity isn't passive, it's feral. She protects it fiercely and punishes any who threaten it. Just ask Actaeon, turned into a stag, for glimpsing her bathing. The myths are filled with such warnings. One story tells of a young woman named Daphne, who flees Apollo's advances and begs for escape. The gods turn her into a laurel tree. Another is of Hippolytus, who reveres Artemis and spurns all women, only to be cursed by Aphrodite. Virginity in myth is never safe. It's coveted, defended, weaponized, and often punished. And real women, they were rarely authors of their own stories. Still, you find a crack in the marble, a papyrus fragment of Sappho's poetry floats to you on the breeze. She writes not about virginity, but about love, about the pain and beauty of longing. Her voice is intimate, female, powerful, and while scholars still debate the exact context of her relationships, her work doesn't concern itself with innocence or shame. It concerns itself with feeling. So, you sit now beneath an olive tree, halfway between temple and tavern, and let it all sink in. In Greece, virginity had many faces. For goddesses, it was independence. For mortal girls, it was requirement. For hetairae, it was irrelevant. And in the theater of myth, it was everything and nothing all at once. One thing's clear, though. It was never truly about the girl herself. It was about the men around her, their control, their fears, their need to define her worth through what she hadn't done. But under all that, quietly, a few women still carved out space to simply be, and their voices, barely audible in their own time, are still whispering across centuries. You step away from the olive groves and whitewashed marble, the scent of honeyed wine and olive oil fading as you travel eastward, much farther east. The land is drier now, the architecture more fortress-like, the script on the walls angular and unfamiliar. You've arrived in ancient India, and here virginity is both spiritual and social currency, intertwined with karma, caste, and cosmic duty. You find yourself in a quiet village at dusk, where preparations for a wedding are underway. Lamps flicker along the path, illuminating rangoli patterns on the floor. The bride is only 14. She's being adorned with turmeric and sandalwood paste by aunts and cousins, while elders chant mantras in the next room. There is no discussion of whether she is a virgin. It's assumed. In fact, it's built into the very foundation of the ceremony, ritually, legally, and karmically. A girl must be untouched before marriage, not necessarily for reasons of morality, but for reasons of ritual purity. Virginity in this culture is about alignment with dharma, with the sacred order of things. You sneak a glance at a palm leaf manuscript. It's from the Manusmriti, a code of conduct that shaped much of ancient Hindu society. It says, a woman should be guarded in childhood by her father, in youth by her husband, and in old age by her sons. Freedom, it seems, is not the priority. Protection is. Virginity is bound to this idea of protection, not only physical, but spiritual. To lose it outside of marriage is not just shameful, it's polluting. It risks throwing off one's karma, one's marriage prospects, one's entire social function. Historians still debate whether this rigidity was consistent across all regions and castes, but the dominant texts suggest a strong ideal: the bride must be a virgin. But here's where things get complicated. Because in temple towns, not far from these domestic rites, another tradition is unfolding. You walk into a brightly decorated complex dedicated to a goddess, maybe Durga, maybe Lakshmi, and find a line of young girls. They're being prepared for initiation, not into marriage, but into Devadasi service. The Devadasis are temple dancers, caretakers, ritual participants, sometimes even spiritual brides of the deity. Their role is revered, their training is intense, and their sexuality, it's complicated. Some Devadasis remain celibate. Others are expected to serve patrons. In some dynasties, Devadasis become consorts to kings. They are not wives in the formal sense, and certainly not virgins in the traditional sense. But they hold social power. They compose poetry. They dance in sacred rites. And crucially, they exist outside the marriage economy. You overhear an elder saying, "She serves the goddess, not a husband." And for some girls, that's freedom. For others, it's constraint in a different costume. Meanwhile, in literary epics like the Mahabharata, virginity is treated with more nuance than you might expect. You read about Draupadi, married to 5 brothers, each of whom she rotates between. She's bold, outspoken, and still considered chaste because her behavior aligns with dharma. Or Kunti, who bears a son before marriage by invoking a god but keeps the secret and is never vilified. These women aren't judged by physical purity alone, but by their intent, their devotion, their context. Still, the societal expectations are real. You pass through a forest as night falls and hear a story from an old sage. He tells of a girl from a lower caste who fell in love with a nobleman. They met in secret. When her pregnancy showed, she was cast out, not by law, but by norms. Her virginity, once lost, stripped her of any future within her village. And yet, here's a twist. In some tantric traditions, you discover texts where sexuality is treated not as shameful, but as sacred. These texts describe union as a path to transcendence. The act of lovemaking is ritualized, symbolic, powerful. Virginity in these sects is irrelevant. What matters is energy balance breath. Historians still argue over how widespread or elite these practices were, but their very existence suggests a parallel thread, one in which virginity is not a cage, but a door. Or maybe just a non-issue. You return to the village and find the wedding underway. The fire crackles as vows are exchanged. The bride walks 7 times around the flame. No one checks her bed sheets. No one mentions her past. Because here, as in many places, virginity isn't verified. It's assumed guarded by ritual and encoded in expectation. But what's striking is how much weight it holds in silence. It's not shouted. It's not debated. It just is. A silent prerequisite. A cultural breath held tight. And yet, just a few miles away in the temple's shadow, a Devadasi dances for the gods, unmarried, unvirginal, and full of devotion. Both women, bride and dancer, are sacred, and neither of them really got to choose what their virginity would mean. You watch them both, wondering who truly feels free. You leave the rhythms of temple bells and Sanskrit verses behind, traveling northwest into colder terrain, starker architecture, and harsher customs. Welcome to ancient Rome, where virginity isn't just a personal trait, it's state business. Seriously. In Rome, virginity could be your job. You step through the grand forum and see a group of white-robed girls walking in formation. Their heads are bowed, their robes crisp, their sandals silent on the stone. These are the Vestal Virgins, arguably the most powerful women in Rome, and yet bound by one of the strictest codes of sexual conduct in the ancient world. Chosen as children, often from elite families, the Vestals served the goddess Vesta, keeper of the sacred flame. Their virginity wasn't just about chastity, it was about national security. If a Vestal broke her vow of celibacy, Rome itself was said to be in danger. Natural disasters, military defeat, crop failure, anything could be blamed on the impurity of a Vestal. You watch one tend the eternal flame and can't help but think that's a lot of pressure for someone who didn't even get to vote. If she stayed pure, she lived in honor. If she didn't, she was buried alive, literally, in a small underground chamber with a little food and water, so the state could claim it wasn't technically an execution. There are records of such punishments, and historians still debate whether they were common or symbolic, but the message was clear. Your body is the Republic's business. Outside the temple walls, though the rules are different. You follow a Roman bride on her wedding day. She wears a saffron-colored veil and is led from her father's house to her husband's. The ceremony is full of symbolism, fire bread, hand-holding oaths. And yes, virginity is expected, not out of spiritual purity, but inheritance logistics. The bride's untouched status is crucial to ensure the groom's children are actually his. But Rome, being Rome, is full of contradictions. You overhear men at the baths bragging about their conquests. They're not expected to be virgins, of course. In fact, it's encouraged that young men gain experience with slaves, with courtesans, sometimes even with other men. As long as they're the dominant party, Roman masculinity remains intact. Virginal men unheard of, or worse, mocked. Women, on the other hand, are caught in a strange duality. You walk into a domus and find a matrona, an elite married woman managing the household. She's expected to be modest, loyal, and above reproach. But next door, a lupanar, or brothel, and their women are not expected to be anything but available. Some are slaves, others are freed women, some are even voluntarily in the trade. For them, virginity is not even a question. It's a commodity bought and sold, once then forgotten. The contrast is dizzying. You read graffiti in Pompeii. One line says, Salatus, the gladiator, is the delight of the girls. Another brags, I screwed the barmaid. It's crude, yes, but revealing. In Rome, Sexual experience is loud, public, scrawled on walls. Virginity, that's something private women must preserve while men boast about taking it. And yet, there were women who chose to remain virgins. You stumble upon a tomb inscription for a woman named Cornelia, who never married. The epitaph praises her virtue, her intellect, and her decision to stay unmarried in devotion to learning. This wasn't common, but it was possible. Women of means could choose celibacy as a form of independence, though often with the trade-off of living under male guardianship. And don't forget mythology. Remember Diana, the Roman version of Artemis? She too is a virgin goddess, but her virginity is wild, not passive. She lives in forests, punishes voyeurs, and refuses to be tamed. The idea of the dangerous virgin runs deep in Roman storytelling. The untouched woman becomes unpredictable, powerful, a threat. There's even the odd case of Lucretia, whose story helped ignite the fall of the Roman monarchy. She was raped by a prince and then took her own life, not because of the act, but because of the loss of honor. Her death becomes a rallying cry for revolution. That's how potent the symbol of female chastity was. It could change governments. But what's sobering is this: for all the poems, laws, and rituals, virginity in Rome wasn't really about the girl. It was about control, political, familial, symbolic. It was something to prove guard or violate, never something to explore on her own terms. You stand now at the edge of a Colosseum as the day winds down, and you see Rome for what it truly was, a place where virginity could crown you or crush you, where the same society that glorified the Vestals executed them, that honored loyal wives and laughed at slave girls, that demanded purity, but only from those with the least power to define it themselves. And somehow the eternal city moves on. You step away from the marble decadence of Rome and into the echoing stillness of early Christian Europe, a time when dim candlelight flickers in monasteries, when saints' lives are whispered like bedtime stories, and when virginity begins to wear a distinctly holy glow. Here, your sandals crunch not on mosaic-tiled courtyards, but on rough, unpaved paths leading to stone chapels nestled in forests. The air is colder. Time feels slower. And suddenly, virginity isn't just about purity or property anymore. It's about spiritual warfare. You pass a nun, kneeling in the garden, her hands tucked into her sleeves. She's not just praying, she's waging a battle. In this world, virginity is no longer a phase to outgrow. It's a lifelong calling, and not just not having sex, but renouncing the entire world of marriage, family, and pleasure. You overhear a sermon. The priest is quoting Paul, "It is good for a man not to touch a woman." And suddenly the idea of chastity becomes elevated, sacred. Virginity is seen as closer to Christ's perfection. And virgin women, they're brides of Christ now. You arrive at a convent where the abbess reads aloud the life of Saint Agnes martyred at 13 for refusing marriage, or Saint Cecilia, who kept her vow of chastity even in wedlock. Their deaths are bloody, dramatic, and yet they're celebrated not as tragedies, but as triumphs of will. Their virginity is seen as proof of divine favor. Historians still debate how much of these martyr tales were embellished, but their influence was profound. You notice something strange, though. While women's virginity is glorified, male celibacy often gets a pass. Monks are praised for it, yes, but it's not the same fervent obsession. No one's checking the spiritual virginity of male pilgrims with quite the same scrutiny. Women, however, must guard theirs like a relic. But here's the twist. That obsession becomes a kind of loophole. You meet a woman named Hroswitha, an actual 10th century nun who writes plays. And guess what? She uses the cultural veneration of virginity to carve out a life of the mind. No husband means no legal guardian. No childbirth means more time for writing. Within the strict bounds of virginity, some women find intellectual freedom. You wander into the scriptorium. It's quiet. Women bend over illuminated manuscripts, copying gospels in gold leaf. They are nuns, yes, but they are also scholars. Their virginity buys them silence from men, silence they can fill with ideas. Still outside the cloister, it's a different story. You stumble into a peasant wedding. The bride wears a crown of herbs, and her hymen, yes, that little stretch of tissue, is the unspoken guest of honor. Because for common folk, virginity isn't about sainthood. It's about honor, lineage, dowries. You overhear talk of testing the sheets. Some families display bloodied linens after the wedding night. Some just claim they did. Historians still argue whether this practice was truly widespread or more of a theatrical ritual, but the fear behind it, that was real. For poor women, there were no convents to escape to, no saints' lives to hide behind. Losing virginity before marriage could mean being cast out shamed or worse. In folk tales, the ruined maiden rarely gets a happy ending. But again, nuance creeps in. You pass a marketplace and hear the whispers of midwives, some of them trained in herbal lore. They offer virginity restorers, poultices, rituals, even small incisions meant to simulate bleeding on the wedding night. Virginity, it turns out, can be rehearsed. And then there are the penitents. You see women walking barefoot toward a church, veils over their heads. Some are widows. Some are former prostitutes. They seek forgiveness and often a chance to reclaim a kind of spiritual virginity. Because here's something wild in Christian doctrine. You can't regrow a hymen, but you can regain purity through repentance. And so virginity becomes less anatomical, more metaphysical. St. Augustine writes of the virginity of the heart. Scholars debate what that even means. But it's clear, by the medieval period, virginity is no longer just about your body. It's about your soul, your intention, your alignment with divine will. Still, the danger of slipping up immense. You hear stories of girls locked in towers by fathers fearing scandal, of women sent to convents against their will, of trials where accusations of unchastity destroyed entire reputations. For all its supposed holiness, virginity could be a weapon. And yet you spot a nun smiling as she waters her herbs. She doesn't look burdened. She looks free. That's the contradiction of this world. For some, virginity was a cage. For others, a shield. For a lucky few, a doorway. And you, walking quietly through the cloisters, can feel the tension in the stones between body and soul, between silence and voice, between duty and self. You step softly now through corridors darker and colder still. The architecture shifts less, stone more timber. The air smells of animal fat, wood smoke, and damp earth. You've arrived in medieval Northern Europe, where virginity carries layers of fear folklore and deep superstition. This is not Rome, where contracts and civic virtue govern chastity. Nor is it the monastery cloister, where sainthood awaited the devout. Here in the scattered hamlets and manorial estates of the feudal age, virginity is less a symbol of piety and more a currency of honor and survival. You peer into a candlelit longhouse. A girl no older than 13 sits beside her mother, who is braiding her hair with dried lavender. Tomorrow she'll be wed to a blacksmith twice her age. Her dowry is small, so her family's bargaining chip is her untouched status. Her virginity is not just expected, it's ensured with reputation, promises, and community surveillance. You listen as the mother whispers, "Don't let the neighbors see you alone with anyone. Don't walk by the mill pond. Don't smile too long at the reeve. It's not about virtue. It's about suspicion." In this world, a girl's worth to her family is her chastity, and even the rumor of its loss can bring shame. Now you're outside again, crunching through frost-tipped grass, and you stumble upon a village gathering, perhaps a small fair or a saint's feast day. A traveling minstrel tells a tale of a knight who saved a damsel so fair and so chaste, and the crowd cheers when her virginity is rewarded with marriage wealth and rescue. The message is subtle but clear. Purity is prizeworthy, but purity is also fragile, and fragile things invite scrutiny. In some towns, midwives or elder women are assigned to inspect brides before marriage. Yes, inspect. Stories circulate of tests involving cloths, fingers, even eggs. Historians still debate whether these rituals were ceremonial or actually performed. But one thing is certain: fear made such practices plausible. And if a girl were found not intact, the consequences ranged from broken engagements to beatings to public penance. In extreme cases, it meant being driven from the village. You pass a church where a local priest preaches a sermon on the Virgin Mary. Her image is everywhere, haloed, serene, head bowed in humility. She becomes the ultimate archetype, not just a virgin, but a mother and a miracle. No pressure, right? This impossible standard haunts every girl you see. And then there's the role of superstition. You hear rumors that a girl's virginity can heal wounds, cure fevers, or protect against curses. One old woman mutters that touching a virgin's breath before sunrise can prevent crops from failing. Another swears a virgin's tears can calm storms. It's absurd, but powerful. Virginity is not just moral, it's mystical, which of course creates another problem: violence. In darker corners of the countryside, where fear overrules sense, some men believe that sleeping with a virgin can cure disease, a horrifying belief that has led to the abuse of vulnerable girls. While such cases were likely rare, they were real enough to leave traces in legal documents and folklore. Scholars still argue how widespread the virgin cure myth truly was, but its echoes remain chilling. You walk into a castle, now a different world entirely. A noblewoman, perhaps 15, is being trained in music, embroidery, and restraint. Her virginity is less about piety and more about politics. Marrying her off will forge alliances. Her body is not hers. It's a treaty waiting to be signed. You notice that unlike the peasant girl, the noblewoman has a confessor, a dowry chest, and servants. But her freedom, just as limited. Her virginity is more guarded, more valuable, and therefore more controlled. And yet, in the bard's tales sung by firesides, there are cracks in this narrative. You hear a song about a girl who ran off with a stable boy, gave birth in the woods, and lived happily ever after. Another tells of a wise woman who tricked a noble into believing his new wife was chaste. Folk tales make space for cleverness for girls who dodge the system. They reflect a deeper truth that people have always known: virginity as society. Defined, it was a performance, sometimes upheld by fear, sometimes by choice, and often by silence. You find yourself at the edge of a winter field, now watching a girl throw stones into a frozen stream. She's no saint, no lady, no legend, just someone trying to survive a world where her worth has been tied to a myth. And as the sun sets behind the thatched roofs and distant steeples, you realize something chilling. In medieval Europe, a girl didn't need to lose her virginity to lose her value. She only had to look like she might have. The frost fades beneath your feet, and the world shifts again, this time eastward, toward gilded domes, candle smoke, and chants that echo through vast cathedrals. You've arrived in Byzantium, where virginity wears a robe of silk, speaks in Greek, and straddles the uneasy space between imperial politics and divine order. You glide through a palace corridor, lit by oil lamps, their light dancing across mosaics of saints and emperors. The Byzantine Empire, you learn, is where the sacred and the secular are lovers, not enemies. And virginity. It's no longer just spiritual or social, it becomes imperial strategy. You hear whispers among the courtiers about a young princess, barely 12, whose virginity is the cornerstone of a marriage alliance with the Bulgarian king. not because anyone expects consummation immediately, but because her untouched state signals dynastic purity. Her body is a symbol, a seal, a diplomatic gift. She's draped in purple silk, her hair woven with pearls, and yet she holds no power over her fate. The court poets may sing of her grace, but her worth is counted in bloodlines and rumors. Byzantine theologians, meanwhile, are having their own complicated debates. You pass through a monastery courtyard and overhear a dispute over the ever-virginity of Mary. Some say she remained untouched, not just before, but also during and after the birth of Christ. A miracle, a metaphor. Historians still argue over what early Christians really believed. But in Byzantium, theology isn't idle thought. It's doctrine wrapped in politics, and the Virgin Mary is its most potent icon. She's painted larger than life in church apses. Her eyes are huge. Her body nearly vanished beneath layers of symbolic robes. She is woman made symbol, untouchable, unreachable, revered. And yet, outside the cloister, the real women of Byzantium live messier lives. You walk into a bustling market in Constantinople. A mother buys herbs to brew a tea she swears will keep her daughter chaste. A young widow negotiates for cloth, her veil half slipped, daring gossip. And there, in a shadowed corner, a merchant sells virginity restorers, imported from the East herbs, salves, rituals. Virginity, you realize, has become commercialized. You overhear a group of women gossiping over embroidered cushions, speculating whether a certain noble's daughter is still a maiden. Their tone is half serious, half spiteful, because in this world, virginity is both currency and competition, a reputation to protect, a tool to use, and sometimes a burden to escape. You wander through an Orthodox convent where a former empress now lives in voluntary seclusion. She renounced her crown after her husband's death and took vows of chastity. Her motivation may be penance, maybe control, maybe peace, because in Byzantium, virginity is flexible, a thing you can lose, regain, or redirect. A woman might take a vow of celibacy after marriage and be praised for it, or she might marry as a virgin, but live a life of political intrigue and pleasure. The rules bend more here, but they never disappear. Even the saints' lives reflect this ambiguity. Take Saint Theodora, a former courtesan who became an empress, or Saint Mary of Egypt, who spent her youth in licentious abandon before retreating into the desert where she lived naked and alone for decades, repenting. These stories are not about preserved virginity, but about transformation, redemption, a spiritual return to a virginal state. It's a strange twist in Byzantium. Spiritual virginity can outshine physical. And yet, for girls at court, the physical still matters. A single scandal could send a family into disgrace. A single whisper could unravel a marriage alliance. So families employ eunuchs to guard their daughters. They keep female companions to monitor their comings and goings. Privacy here is a luxury of the naive. You step now into Hagia Sophia. The dome arches above you like a golden sky. Candles flicker. Incense burns. The chants echo in languages old enough to make your bones ache. And in the very center, beneath the mosaics and marble, you realize something simple and stunning. Virginity in Byzantium wasn't one thing. It was everything. It was political leverage. It was religious symbolism. It was social expectation. And occasionally, it was a path to freedom, if a woman could wield it carefully enough. You leave the city at dusk, watching ships sail through the Bosphorus. Somewhere aboard, no doubt, a young girl heads toward a new life, her chastity, her passport, her silence, her power. And in the candlelit halls behind you, the myths of Mary, the whispers of saints, and the footfalls of history linger in the marble, still undecided on whether virginity is holiness or burden. The sea breeze carries you onward once more, farther, still past Byzantium's twilight splendor, and into the dust-blown alleys and sun-warmed stone walls of medieval Islamic societies, stretching from Persia to Andalusia. Here you find yourself wrapped in the scent of cardamom ink and rose water. And here, too, virginity is many things, scriptural, poetic, and perilous. You arrive in a courtyard where water trickles into a marble basin. A young girl in a deep blue veil sits reading from a small hand-copied book of hadith. Her teacher watches closely, not just her recitation, but how she sits, how she speaks, how her eyes avoid meeting yours. Virginity in this place is wrapped not just in body, but in modesty, silence, and invisibility. In Islam, virginity is explicitly mentioned in religious texts, but it is not just a biological status. It's a spiritual quality. In the Quran, virgins in paradise are described, but mostly as rewards for the faithful, mystical, symbolic, and heavily interpreted. Scholars still debate how literally such verses were meant to be taken, and whether the emphasis was carnal or metaphorical. Some believe the descriptions reflect not lust, but the promise of purity restored in the afterlife. But here on earth, things are more complicated. You pass through a bustling souk in Damascus, where you hear whispered negotiations over marriage contracts. A bride's virginity increases her mahr, the dower paid by the groom to the bride. The higher the mahr, the more proof of her untouched status. But of course, proof is a social construct. No one checks scientifically. People check symbolically. You find a scribe drafting a nikah, a marriage contract, and including a clause that the bride is a virgin. If that turns out to be untrue, the groom can lower the mahar or annul the marriage. But whether he does or dares depends more on honor than law. And honor in this world is everything. You pass a courtyard where women gather to drink coffee behind veils and screens. Here, away from male eyes, the story changes. One elderly woman recounts her wedding night not as a sacred union, but as a performance complete with red-dyed sheets laid out in advance. Another laughs softly and says her mother taught her to bite her own lip to produce blood if needed. Virginity here, too, is sometimes a theater staged for survival. In richer households, things are even more opaque. You enter a home in Cordoba where girls are taught calligraphy, music, and recitation. The rules are strict. The windows are high. The daughters rarely go outside. They're not just preserving their virginity, they're preserving the family's reputation, which rides on their chastity like a balancing act on a sword's edge. But then something unexpected. You visit the library of a philosopher, Ibn Rushd, who writes about ethics and reason. His female relatives read and write beside him. You find poems written by women, educated, unwed, fiercely articulate, who explore desire, loss, and faith, often while remaining unmarried. For some, virginity became a canvas for intellectual independence. And elsewhere, more contradictions. In Cairo, a physician writes in a medical text that a ruptured hymen is not proof of lost virginity. It can break from riding or exercise. Some Islamic jurists argue the same, that honor should not hinge on fragile membranes. And yet custom often outweighs law. In villages, hymen myths persist, and young brides still fear their wedding nights as tests. You walk now into a palace garden in Persia, where orange blossoms bloom and nightingales sing above carved stone benches. A poet sits cross-legged under a fig tree pen in hand. His verses drift into